She's back. Hillary Clinton joined Morning Joe to share her advice for President Kamala Harris. Perhaps unsolicited advice? Let's watch.
I have no doubt that the Harris-Walz campaign, like my campaign, will win the popular vote. But I think, as we all know, that doesn't get you the election. You've got to win 270 electoral votes. I think what needs to happen is what they are doing, just more, deeper, more intensely, which is reaching out to people both with the positive story. And, sometimes I'm asked, well, where is the policy? Well, go to the website. That's where the policy is. I had more policy than anybody had. I gave speeches about it. It was on our website. I wrote a book with Tim Kaine about it. We had lots of policy. At the end of the day, that's not what caused people to vote for me or against me. And I think the Harris campaign knows that. They know that you've got to, cross a threshold, which they have more than done, in terms of what kind of governance you're promising. But at the end of the day, this is a contest between freedom and oppression, between democracy and autocracy, between bringing people together and further dividing us. And that's what has to be communicated every single day between now and the election.
Clinton also said she's talked to the vice president several times. She has also warned that Trump has changed a lot since she ran against him in 2016. Let's watch that clip.
I've talked with Kamala a few times. I obviously talked with her before the debate because he is more incoherent. He is angrier. He is lashing out all the time at everybody. He's filled with grievance and rage. And, in my acceptance speech at the convention way back in 2016, I said, you can't trust somebody with nuclear weapons who you can bait with a tweet, because I saw that in him at the time. A lot of people didn't, or they gave him the benefit of the doubt, or they thought, hey, we've had 2 terms of a Democrat, let's try the Republicans, for whatever reason. I understand that. But now the stakes are even higher because he has a record.
Well, she's back.
And she thinks that she had all these policies, and was like, well, go read them in my book or on my website. That does not work. Why do people think that works? You have to explain the policies, because it's not just vibes, and it's not just telling a positive story or whatever advice she was giving there. No, I think the voters do care about the policies, and you have to explain why the policies you're advocating are going to work. You can't just, you can't just trust people to go read all about them on your propagandistic website and decide that that policy is going to work. And the problem for Democrats and for Republicans, for political figures, is that they have policies that they've crafted that maybe appeal to the elites in their own party, or their donors, or their fiercest supporters, but might not make a lot of economic sense or electoral sense or whatever it is. And so they end up getting rejected by the people. A policy on banning fracking, for instance, might be on the website, but if that's your policy, certainly don't tell the voters about it, but they know it's your policy and they don't like it.
Yeah, I think, to your point, I think Democrats, and I've said this for a long time, we get lost in statistics. We love to talk about, grandiose ideas and stuff like that without actually doing the brass tacks work of explaining our policies, why they're better for a lot of folks on the lower end of the economic spectrum, because we see that disconnect, that populism that Donald Trump first put forward in 2016 really appeals to these folks, right? Even though we talked about this with the unions too, that they are likely voting against their own self-interest as a unionized worker, right, in terms of right to work votes and laws out there, and that we have failed them because we take them for granted, right? We say, how could you be so stupid to vote against your own self-interest? Stick with us, without actually doing the hard work of persuading them to stay with us and stay on our side. So certainly, I think it's always interesting to see. I think no one else has the perspective that Secretary Clinton does, right? Having faced this guy in the past, right? She's out there with her new book, obviously doing a media tour right before the election. We'll see if the vice president's campaign super welcomes that. But she was effective, certainly in Chicago, with that speech before the convention.
Well, she's popular among many Democrats, but got to win those swing voters. I'm glad that she appreciates now that winning the popular vote doesn't matter anything.
It's true.
You don't win these
like
swing
horseshoes,
states.
right? Yeah.
Doesn't matter. You know, you talked about, you know, voting against your interests for instance, maybe for the labor people. I mean, I don't know. Like, does it show? Is your express preference that you do think it's in your interest, for instance, to have, you know, so we should go into like what right to work is maybe a little bit, which I do actually support right to work. I think you should not have to join a union if you don't want to. There are people who are part of unions or support labor in general, but maybe don't support the priorities of the union at the leadership level, including support for democratic policies. Maybe it could be different democratic policies. Maybe it's you don't like what their education policy is. Now you might, you know, their being part of the union devolves some economic benefits to you, but you don't like that they're spending money to help elect Democrats who are going to have, let's say it's a bad COVID policy or a bad education policy or bad foreign policy, whatever you think. So then you're like, well, I don't want part of my paycheck is being forcibly confiscated from me and given the Democratic Party, and I want the right to say no to that. So maybe you do support right to work.
And I think, and I hear that argument. Obviously, it's a persuasive argument for a lot of workers. I think coupled with that is the notion of collective bargaining, obviously, and the protections that come with that, and the ability to not be just fired at will, which a lot of these right to work states have. There's obviously power in numbers and the ability to bargain as a group for increased wages and health care coverage and things like that. But certainly, we're seeing that, and we talked about it with the Teamster in the Teamster block, that dynamic of especially working class folks and the disconnect that we're seeing with the Democratic Party and a lot of these, speaking as a Democrat, in a lot of these key states, that we have failed them, right, in carrying them and taking them for granted. Similar to what we're seeing, and we talked about this yesterday, with Hispanic voters and black voters, and the surprise that I think a lot of people in my party are feeling with that drift away from the Democrats that have always been base supporters.
She said in that interview that she thinks Donald Trump has gotten more incoherent, more rattled, more angry, etc. I think you can make an argument, perhaps, that we saw more of those kinds of tendencies in Donald Trump in this debate with Kamala Harris that did not go, even his supporters admit, did not go super well for him. Prior to that, when he was running against Biden, I would say the opposite. I think there was a discipline and a coherence to what he was doing. It was his behavior at the RNC was, I think, very reassuring to people who don't want democratic policies but weren't sure that they could sign up for another 4 years of Donald Trump. I think he was reassuring to them.
I think in the first half hour maybe of the speech, but then he turned into some of his greatest hits and things like that.
Well, yes.
Later on, that was a little bit.
I think he's clearly frustrated that he has to run now against Kamala Harris when he was prepared to run against Joe Biden.
Certainly,
and
I know that's for true.
Has rattled him a little bit, and it's affecting his debate performance.
Oh, certainly, and his speeches before large audiences. We saw that on Long Island last night too. That he was still hitting on some of his greatest hits, and still, mixing up some people's names and places and stuff like that. But certainly, there's certainly an axe to grind, I think, with the former Secretary of State in a lot of these media appearances too. That's fueling a lot of this.
It is a little rich whenever I hear him described as, but he's so old and he doesn't know what he's saying anymore. I'm like, okay, Joe Biden was your candidate until 3 months ago. And that was way worse. And that was being totally minimized. So I have a hard time taking that criticism seriously. But we will continue to follow the exploits of the former Secretary of State and former Democratic candidate for President Hillary Clinton. And we'll be back with more Rising right after this.